All right, let's do it. We are starting off here with the second chapter of Last. We're almost done. Then I can go on to reading other things. Huzzah! All right, let's jump right in. Arc 20, Last, Chapter 2. No portals meant we had to take the long way back. This, I had to imagine, was part of the Simorg's plan. Draw us out, tie us down, and then go after the biggest target. It felt bad. I was aware of the running clock. The countdown Dragon had provided had shut off when she'd gone dark, but that was for Simorg exposure. We had another countdown, the time before she merged with Titan Fortuna and enacted her plan. The back of the Uther was smaller than I'd imagined it being, equivalent to my old bedroom in Brockton Bay, or Crystal's living room, and there were a lot of us left to find our seats or places to stand. Defiant was up front, piloting a flight of Dragon's ships. Room. And there were a lot of us left to find our seats or places to stand. Defiant was up front, piloting a flight of Dragon's ships to land near other groups to carry other people who had fought the Simorg. As we'd climbed in, there had been a few weird voids that formed, spaces people had been reluctant to fill. Benches had been quickly claimed, then ceded to the injured. The center... I think I stuttered on seated, too. A few weird voids that formed, spaces people had been reluctant to fill. Benches had been quickly claimed, then ceded to the injured. The center aisle down the back of the craft was harder to fill, but Defiant deployed drop-down handholds from the ceiling. There had still been a void, however, around Defiant. Like nobody wanted to bother him or seem too familiar. I braved it, stepping into those 5 feet or so of empty space. There was a passenger seat, and I stood with my back to it and to Defiant. Sveta found a position just to my left. Byron sat down hard on the seat, metal against metal, and put his head back, eyes closed. Couldn't be easy, even with the general help Chris had provided. And there was no Vista backing him up here. She had her own people and team to look after, presumably in the Dragon ship with a single curved horn that I could see outside.
ETA, 10 minutes,
Defiant said.
Whatever she's doing back at the Warden's headquarters, it's her final move before she goes after Titan Fortuna.
The hatch at the back closed. The last few people crowded in. Chris took a seat with his back to the hatch, which most avoided leaning against. The hatch at the back closed. The last few people crowded in. Chris took a seat with his back to the hatch, which there's no people in there, just which most avoided. The hatch at the back closed. The last few people crowded in. Chris took a seat with his back to the hatch, which most avoided leaning against or standing near, as if it might open mid-flight and see them tip. Well, that was just my body failing me. He'll hydrate. Man. Took a seat with his back to the hatch, which most avoided leaning against or standing near, as if it might open mid-flight and see them tip out. I could imagine Chris growing emergency wings or a means of surviving the landing if he had to.
Waiting for the other ships to board,
Defiant announced, without glancing back at us. His spear telescoped and he placed a socket in the wall.
I know you want to get there as soon as possible, but I'll be flying every ship we have myself, and I wouldn't want to be responsible for a ship I can't see in the event of an ambush, especially with signal latency and reliability right now.
Did we make the wrong call, engaging her here? I asked, Defiant.
There are no right calls when dealing with her, Defiant said. Have a look for yourself.
A projected map of the city appeared between the two seats. I turned and looked. The buildings were drawn out in gray-blue, with whole stretches of the city flattened or eaten up by the cracks. The good guys were icons in green, floating over scattered dots. Titans stood out in bold red, with slight color variation for Fortuna's cluster, crimson, against Dauntless's, pink. Arachne and the other independents were orange.
Draw a circle with your finger to pick it up.
I experimented. Damsel of Distress was in the back of the craft and moved closer. Withdrawal also drew closer, looking. Keep everyone close to the Warden's headquarters. How do I play it out?
You'll need something for that. It didn't cross my mind,
he said, voice low, attention on his screens, which had nothing to do with the simulation.
You're that far gone, Defiant?
Clockblocker called out from the far end of the other bench.
Forgot about us mere mortals needing keyboards and mice, wow.
Keyboards
that
and
far
mice.
Gone, Defiant?
Clockblocker called out from the far end of the other bench.
Forgot about us mere mortals needing keyboards and mice and voice commands to operate tech?
Defiant grunted, in what might have been annoyance, assent, or negation.
I remember liking the interface he made for tech he helped me with,
Kidwin said. Was it Kidwin?
Give me a moment,
Defiant said.
Hey, Kidwin,
I said, addressing him from the opposite corner of the Uther's rear bay. Did you end up changing your name? You went by your civilian name when we crossed paths.
I had ideas. The Clockblocker is trying to convince me of Windman.
No, I said.
It works.
Clockblocker's humor was audible in his tone.
Like a wingman, but without the G.
That makes no sense, Damsel of Distress told him.
We're part of the cursed generation,
Clockblocker said, his bench leaning forward from the weight of two other members of the flock and some of Deathchester sitting on it. He lifted a bandaged ankle up to his knee.
A lot of the good names were taken. We were young and inexperienced as things started ramping up. Most of the people my age were totally unprepared for the world ending. We only got lucky because our city went to shit.
Lucky, Christopher said. Christopher is Kidwin. Man,
prepared for the
can't
world
just
ending.
switch like that.
We only got lucky because our city went to shit.
Lucky, Christopher said, almost inaudible.
I like my name,
Finale said.
Finale. It really works.
I was 95% sure it was taken. I decided not to break her heart by saying so. Caryatid, too, for that matter. The chatter continued. Defiant's voice was deep and distinctive enough to cut through it.
Antares, slash your hand through it to execute. Same movement in reverse to stop.
Good word, execute,
Damsel observed, leaning into the top of his seat. One of her hands hung limp at her side, claws dragging across the floor. I executed, karate chopping the simulation. Everyone close to the warden's base, assuming the Seamorg would arrive there. She didn't. She moved to the largest encampment of refugees. I adjusted, moving some people around.
Taking off,
Defiant raised his voice.
Take your seats or grab a handhold.
I used a grip on the passenger seat to keep myself... Pardon me.
Taking off,
Defiant raised his voice.
Take your seats or grab a handhold.
I used a grip on the passenger seat to keep myself upright until I had a sense of where the craft was going, then used flight to help keep up. I adjusted the response teams for the crisis, then karate... Okay. until I had a
Context.
sense of where the craft was going, then used flight to help keep up. I adjusted the response teams for the crisis, then karate chopped the projection again. Red dots began to surround the Seamorg. Civilians, I assumed, who were being weaponized and turned into threats. Heroes mobilized, used portals, and the machine army escaped its perimeter. I stopped, sent forces over, drawing a circle around a group of teams, then directing them to the machine army. Something wiped out half of the forces on the heroes' side. What? I asked.
You can go back, Defiant said. The simulations assume some worst-case scenarios. Bombs, betrayals, all-out losses, outside intervention, groups you've split off being turned into her pawns.
I don't think I want to play this game, I said. I adjusted my flight as Defiant turned the Uther a bit.
I am always playing this game, Defiant said. I play through it on fast forward, adjusting on the fly, working out who is where, what the enemy is doing. On the battlefield, I simulate what my opponents will do.
Almost like a precog.
No, he said. I am very good at assessing battlefields. That's all it is. Right now, we are in a state where we have next moves we can make. Stay focused. Don't lose heart.
And prepare for that bomb, all-out loss, intervention, or whole groups being taken as her pawns, I thought.
Can I?
Withdrawal asked. No, that's not how I did his voice. It's closer to intervention, or whole groups being taken as her pawns, I thought.
Can I?
Withdrawal asked. Go right ahead, I told him. He was in an awkward position, his limb extension frame making him too tall for the Uther, but he found a crouching position, had his frame grab a handhold above, and detached from it so he could reach forward and experiment with the simulation.
Damsel,
Rain said.
That's damsel of distress to you. Use my full name, you cretin.
behave,
Defiant called out. Your arm, Rain said, indicating the arm that hung limp. Defiant called out. Your arm, Rain said, indicating the arm that hung limp at her side.
There are things about a lady you don't remark on if you care about your well-being. Age, weight, and war wounds. Words to live by,
Sidepiece said, reclining back on the bench so her ripped-up stomach stretched, strings of flesh snapping where they extended too far from upper to lower body. There were little sparks and puffs of smoke where the spatter hit the floor and Caryatid's dress. Rain leaned forward, pulling off his mask, squinting. That doesn't look like battle damage. Your muscles further up your arm are twitching, which reads to me like a connection issue.
There are 4 things about a lady you don't remark on, you drooling malcontent.
Do you want me to fix it? I'm not at my best today, but that's easy stuff.
The arm works. I'm choosing not to use it.
Because it hurts you when it hurts when you do.
The arm works. I'm choosing not to use it.
Because it hurts when you do. Let me fix it.
Who are you to tell me what to do?
Oh my God, Sveta whispered. Damsel of distress, I said. She snapped her head around to glare at me. It means you're more focused, and you can annihilate more chunks of Endbringers and Titans. I saw you out there. We all want you out there as long as possible.
You want me weak, she told us, so your dear swan song can sneak in, blur the boundaries between me and her, take over, and then you'll have her back.
I shook my head. If that's really a thing that happens, you being in constant pain is going to make you weaker than Daning. I shook my head. If that's really a thing that happens... Wait, I was on the wrong spot.
her, take over, and then you'll have her back.
I shook my head. If that's really a thing that happens, you being in constant pain is going to make you weaker than deigning to have a tinker service your arm.
I know what you do, Antares, she told me. I know how you brainwashed Swan Song. You pick your words. Deign. Service me.
I folded my arms. So, that's the game, damsel of distress. The back and forth. Villains prey on civilian, hero fights villain, civilian supports hero, or they're supposed to. The hero-villain interplay continues until something so big and bad happens that we get stuck on the same battlefields. When that happens, we put aside the old rivalries and snark at each other, picking words carefully, cutting each other down with words while cooperating in general.
Or you could not cut each other down,
Finale said.
Can't help it, Damsel said. I have blades for fingers. I could pat you on the cheek, child, but I might slash your throat. I'm 18.
Chris snorted.
Weren't you 16 2 years ago, Ash? You were brought out of the cloning vats at the same age you were when you were at your peak.
Oh, I actually did say that correctly. It didn't feel like I did. Chris snorted.
Weren't you
Also, I don't think he's in a form. I think he's in his regular body. Which means different voice. Chris snorted.
Weren't you 16 2 years ago, Ash? You were brought out of the cloning vats at the same age you were when you were at your peak back in Boston. You're the same age as that child.
Look how conveniently positioned you are. I could obliterate you and the mess would get sucked straight out the back of this ship.
You could not obliterate him. Defiant raised his voice. You are a guest on my ship. We are operating under a truce.
Killjoy,
Sidepiece snorted.
Let's not bait the A-tier cape,
Disjoint murmured to her.
Wait, when's your birthday?
Chris asked, baiting both damsel and the A-tier cape.
I'm curious if you're younger.
Chris, Sveta said, beating me to it by a hair, her voice sharp. Rain started to get up, hesitated, and then navigated his way through the people in his way, mainly Caryatid, a flock member, and Withdrawal's Flame. Flame. And Withdrawal's Frame. Get up. Man hesitated, and then navigated his way through the people in his way, mainly Caryatid, a flock member, and Withdrawal's Frame. Damsel of Distress looked like she was going to say something, but he dropped to his knees. Give me your arm, he asked. He put a hand out, reaching into a pocket of his costume for tools. I have more tools if you need them, Precipice, said. Great, Rain said. I don't think I will. This should take a minute or two, if she's willing. Damsel made a head movement that might have been her rolling her eyes, except she didn't have irises or pupils, so the effect was somewhat lost. She laid her hand in his, blades facing up and resting along his side. He sliced open her wrist, accessing... Man, I am struggling. She laid her hand in his, blades facing up and resting along his side. He sliced open her wrist, accessing the mechanical parts of the hands that the blade fingers were mounted on.
Anyone else need first aid? Clockblocker asked. I remember stuff.
Oh, could you patch me up?
Sidepiece asked.
My stomach has a small hole in it.
Finale said.
I don't think I could manage that,
Clockblocker said.
Too bad. I could use the extra ammo.
What about you?
Clockblocker asked Trophy Wife.
Your arm.
She had some fingers that were pretty badly mangled, bending the wrong ways, broken in multiple places. One of her ears was missing.
I don't need anything. I regenerate slowly.
She indicated the trophy rack that was mounted on her back. There were bits of meat, gristle, one eyeball that wasn't human, and 2 fingers attached to it. She touched a dead, dried, tailless lizard.
It's not much, but I'm granting some benefits to everyone in this craft. Wait, those things are real? Finale asked. Even those fingers? A neurosurgeon's fingers. Ah, no! That's so wrong and gross and creepy.
Those are fresh. Christopher, God damn it.
No, that's so wrong and gross and creepy.
Those are fresh, Christopher said. You actually chopped off a neurosurgeon's fingers in the last 24 hours?
He supplied me other fingers before.
Finale put her hands over her ears.
That'll be enough, please,
Caryatid said.
What's going on with that guy?
Sidepiece asked.
A drug addiction he picked up writing his own script before
God damn it. Writing his own script before gold morning.
What's going on with that guy?
Sidepiece asked.
A drug addiction he picked up writing his own script before gold morning, and a terrible debt he got after. I asked him if he wanted to give me a pinky finger or 100,000 new dollars. He gave me the pinky. When people were packing up their things and evacuating the city, he knocked on my door. He wanted to ensure he didn't go without, offered me everything he owned. I took 2 more fingers instead.
Barbaric, I noted.
He's contributing more to stop the end of the world than the rest of them,
Trophy Wife said.
Quicker fingers and better hand-eye coordination for me and everyone around me.
A good share of them are down in the crystal landscape, preparing to bomb it again, I told her. I wouldn't be so sure they're not making an impact. The woman shrugged, fur collar rising and falling. This is depressing, Withdrawal said, before abandoning the projected. Fur collar rising and falling. This is depressing, Withdrawal said, before abandoning the projected simulation. He retreated back to where Finale was. Christopher approached, but he didn't engage with the simulation. I watched his metallic eyes surveying the technology around him. It's good to have you on board, Wynn, Defiant said, less authoritarian and stern than I'd heard him since we'd gotten on board. It's not a complete me, but sure. I feel like I've been away for a very long time. I returned to my hometown and everything's changed, me included. I have tools if you want to while away the remaining minutes. Nah, Christopher said, unless you're trying to get rid of me. No. The projection disappeared and appeared in the passenger seat. Arms crossed, I looked over the headrest as it started shifting, showing movements. It looked like the Seamorg was at the Warden's new headquarters for this exercise. The image divided, zooming into the headquarters to show the people within as dots. A lot of dots. Planning? I asked. No, Defiant said. I watched as dots began to turn yellow and orange around the Seamorg. In the other half of the simulation, watching the city as a whole, there were violet dots spreading out from one of the portals, the main perimeter of the machine army. Damsel was craning her head to one side to watch, while Rain worked on her wrist. This wasn't a plan. It was what was happening right this moment. Kenzie, the heartbroken, Tattletale, My sister. All in the hands of the Simorg as she exerted her influence. Her last big play before taking over Fortuna. I saw Christopher's mouth press into a line as he eyed the simulation. A few were turning red already. It might have been my imagination, but I felt like the red dots were moving in a different way, against the current or with more energy.
Is Dragon okay?
I asked Defiant, trying to take my mind off of the Simorg and the sea of dots. I looked out the front window of the Uther instead, which was cracked from an earlier battle. Some buildings glowed, powered by generators, but it was mostly dark and empty.
She's doing diagnostics. The machine army making contact with her is a nightmare scenario. She wants to be careful. How dangerous is it? Christopher asked. What if they got my tech?
Defiant answered.
Then they would study it and incorporate it. People fighting them weeks from now would have a harder time.
It seemed like they were pulling out new tricks a lot faster than that in the last fight, I told Defiant.
I know. The Simorg may have planned that. It may be a psychological ploy to unnerve us. At least for now, it might be better to think of ways to deal with her and put the machine army out of mind. Other capes are working to try and slow the perimeter breach.
Working to try, I thought, noting the wording. Not succeeding, not stopping the breach.
Okay. Dealing with the Simorg.
Cryptid, I said, turning back. I was interrupting ongoing conversations.
Is the Mathers giant in the facility?
It is.
Can she help? Does that work as a countermeasure against the Simorg?
That's the idea,
he said. No more hard T sound to his voice. He was mostly old Chris now. I looked over to Defiant.
Does that factor into the calculations? Does it change the end result?
He turned to look at me, gaze moving between me and the dark, snow-dusted ruins of the city that was visible beyond the front window.
If the answer was one you didn't like, would you want me to tell you, or would you want your mind unfettered by distractions?
That's a really ominous question to be asking right now, Defiant, Sveta said beside me. Defiant was silent. I was aware that conversations in the back had died down some. Withdrawal was still engaging with Finale.
Honesty is probably better, I said.
I already took it into account, he said. He reached out to touch a terminal where he had been operating the craft without hands on controls earlier. In the corner of my eye, I saw the projection change. Our ships at the facility, the Simorg still there. And there wasn't a single person there who didn't have some light exposure. The facility was flooded yellow, with 15 to 20 red dots and a mess of orange. Light exposure, moderate exposure, and long-term dangers.
We land in 3 minutes, he told us. The phone call with Riley Davis, formerly known as Bonesaw, will be around the time of landing, given the expedition team's current trajectory. Who's handling it?
I will, I said. And the call to Contessa?
Nope.
Different
current trajectory. Who's handling it?
I will, I said. And the call to Contessa?
We'll see when Dragon is back in touch. For now, everything on that front is stalled. If you happened to be out of contact, we could wait for you, but...
But you know what we need to ask her. Just get back to me with the info?
Of course.
I adjusted my flight as the craft not stopped. You know what we need to ask her. Just get back to me with the info?
Of course.
I adjusted my flight as the crafts dipped, falling into a single-file line. A part of me wanted to be out there, flying alongside, instead of cooped up in here with a bunch of villains and scared kids. I'm sorry, by the way, I told Defiant, about disregarding your instructions, using the technology to access Precipice's dream space.
I know.
I wasn't sure what to say to that. I tried.
I'll assume you had simulations for that course of action.
No, not how it works. I need data to draw on. That was far afield. It could be that we needed that kind of thinking for this, but my feelings around that are still complicated. It could have precipitated the end of the world, but we ended up needing it.
Complicated feelings are human, I told him.
Not limited to humans, I'm sure Dragon will tell you, he replied. Going into this particular battlefield, we'll need to keep a handle on our feelings. The Sea Morgue. Mass madness.
Yeah, I said.
I really hope we don't need to use your plan, he told me. But I accept we need a contingency for the worst-case scenario.
Amen,
Christopher murmured under his breath. He turned metallic eyes toward me. I nodded. It was my plan, but I couldn't disagree. And with that said, as much as I welcome the conversation while my usual... I nodded. It was my plan, but I couldn't disagree. And with that said, as much as I welcome the conversation while my usual conversation partner is
it was
out of
my
contact,
plan,
but I couldn't disagree. And with that said, as much as I welcome the conversation while my usual conversation partner is out of contact, I should focus on the next part of the flight.
Of course,
I said. Christopher, Kid Win, flock member, just left without another word or comment. Defiant seemed not to mind. The flight that left without another word or comment. Defiant seemed not to mind. The flight that Defiant wanted to focus on was taking us through a portal between worlds. The reason for his needing to focus became apparent when I saw how narrow the aperture was. Most of the portals were centered around stations, or had been opened up to a particular size. This portal was open around a station, the facility set up to serve as a gate for vehicles to pass through, forming a loose triangle shape. Defiant piloted us toward the peak of the triangle high above the ground. I could only eyeball it and remember the ship's general shape, and I was pretty sure the sides would be scraping the portal's edges and the belly would be scraping the uppermost part of the gate. Beside me, Sveta touched Byron's shoulder, gently shaking him awake. His eyes opened. I could see his expression change as he took... My mouth is getting mealy. 1 second. Need to hail hydrate. Sveta touched Byron's shoulder, gently shaking him awake. His eyes opened. I could see his expression change as he took in his surroundings, then reality caught back up with him. From a faintly annoyed 17-year-old to a very confused teenager, the slight hint of pain or tension as he moved and felt injuries or soreness from overexertion. Then, a leap to an expression better suited to a world-weary 27-year-old than a teenager, trying to be stoic despite the accumulated anxieties, pain, and stresses of decades. We passed through the portal, and the turbulence was violent. The ship shuddered, and something broke outside. Caryatid said. I wondered if being on a moving vehicle made it hard for her breaker state invulnerability to count. That was inconsequential battle damage from fighting Titans, Defiant announced for everyone present. I chose the Uther because I'm the... pardon me. Consequential battle damage from fighting Titans, Defiant announced for everyone present. I chose the Uther because I'm most comfortable flying it. Don't worry. He was not very good at being reassuring. Less reassuring was the sight of the old Cauldron facility. The exterior of it was illuminated, and it was a white tombstone the size of a mountain, with details that only stood out if I looked for them. Balconies, roads running from one balcony to the next. There were humps further down, encasing pumps, filters, disposal. Sveta sighed.
Hate this place.
You're about to hate it more,
Clockblocker said. He held onto one of the hanging loops of metal that served as handholds.
Seamorg's in there?
She is, Defiant answered.
You good to fight?
Clockblocker asked Byron.
Sure,
Byron said, a bit wary.
Vista's boyfriend,
Clockblocker said. He looked over at his teammate.
I feel like I should be stepping in or saying something, because I still imagine her as 12.
A bit,
Christopher said.
She's said a lot about you two,
Byron said.
The city you were heroes in, ups and downs. You should share them sometime,
Clockblocker said.
Windman and I, we've got gaps.
Sure, Byron said.
Please don't use Windman,
I told Christopher. Clockblocker just snorted. He turned his attention back to Byron. Man, this chapter's not going well for me.
Please don't use Windman,
I told Christopher. Clockblocker just snorted. He turned his attention back to Byron.
You've got to live for Vista, you know. You can't go breaking her heart.
I know.
Windman and I, we already failed her there. I don't know if it helps or it matters, but that's not one of the things she mentions when she's talking about you,
Byron said.
She wouldn't. She didn't when it was Aegis,
Clockblocker said, meeting my eyes.
Or Gallant. I don't think you can look at it that way,
Byron said.
It's not failure.
It's not exactly a success, Christopher answered.
Guys,
Sveta said, quiet.
Capricorn lost his brother earlier tonight. Let's not debate it.
If the two boys were going to say anything in response to that, and it looked like Christopher might from the frown that crossed his face, and his hand swept over his altered, golden hair, they didn't, because the ship violently changed orientation as we came down for a landing. People pulled hard on the handholds and gripped the bars by the benches. The landing was rougher than the sudden post-dive pitch. I could feel the grind as the landing gear scraped against our makeshift runway. The Uther came to a complete stop. The back hatch hissed before hydraulics eased it down. Chris vaulted over before it was even halfway open. Clockblocker gave Byron a helping hand in standing from the bench. Everyone filed out, Deathchester at the rear, onto the ramp that extended around the base of the building's first, second, and third floors, lit by lights inset in the wall and ramp's edge, everything else around us dark. Though it was white snow on white material, I could see footprints where the indents allowed for shadow. Other ships had landed. People were getting out. Only a few of the Undersiders were in another ship, Rachel and Foyle. Tattletale and Imp were inside the facility. Yellow dots turning orange or red as we got our bearings here. There were the Shepherds, advanced guard. There's no D at the end. Yellow dots turning orange or red as we got our bearings here. There were the Shepherds, advance guard, Foresight. I saw crystal clear in Foresight's midst. Got our bearings here. There were the Shepherds, advance guard, Foresight. I saw crystal clear in Foresight's midst. Vista, rather than stand by Narwhal, joined Byron, taking his hand in hers. Narwhal joined Defiant out in front of the half-circle of capes.
Mission briefing. Heads up,
Narwhal called out.
No chatter.
If there was any chatter, I hadn't heard or seen it happening. It seemed to stop, because she went straight to the rundown.
We don't have long. She's projected to attack Fortuna in 20 minutes. Our job is to do as much damage as possible to her, hem her in, and slow her down. If you can't do that, or if you can't get to her, then focus on targeting anyone that's been compromised, so the greater population of capes and powers can engage with her. Damn it. So the greater or if you can't get to her, then focus on targeting anyone that's been compromised, so the greater population of capes and powers can engage with her or resume their ordinary duties. I've already talked to sub-teams with their missions, which will involve limiting her access to the facility-wide communications and letting certain Tinker Tech out of the box.
Do not get bogged down, Defiant told us. Do not get too deep into the facility. If you have questions or need directions, make a phone call. I will be on the other end, provided distortion isn't too heavy.
That's it. No time for anything prettier or more detailed. If you're here, it's because we trust you,
Narwhal shouted.
The doors are there. Go!
Ships were taking off behind us, and the force of their takeoff produced wind and pulses of gravity from behind us, like a push to get us going. My team got moving. I flew behind them, wishing doors were taller so I could fly over people's heads. Defiant met my eyes, and brought his hand to the side of his head in the universal signal for phone. Riley. Or Contessa, but I wasn't holding my breath for that call just yet. I'd definitely be holding my breath for the call in general, though. A word from Dragon.
I'll catch up, I told my team. Good luck,
Precipice. I nodded. We need it. Chris hung back as well. He was transforming. Everyone else was disappearing into the facility.
Are you coming?
Byron called back. Cryptid?
I'll catch up,
Cryptid said. Phone at my ear, I listened. There was a lot of rustling. Voices.
How is the flock? If Valkyrie is...
Riley's voice. I heard my Aunt Sarah.
Gone. She became an extension of the power network. We're calling them Titans. The flock is disturbed.
If you need any attention or touch-ups...
We might, thank you.
Do you accept it that easily because you trust me, or because you don't have any choice?
Valkyrie trusted you, and she didn't trust easily. I can't speak for every member of the flock, but I do trust you.
Even though I'm occupying myself with this? Weapons? Do you know what would have happened if I'd pulled this trigger?
Worrying, if Riley is armed, I thought.
Booting up,
a man said, before and under his breath.
I hope. Get this working.
Any guesses?
Riley asked. Aunt Sarah said,
The weapons don't matter. We might need weapons. If we don't extend the benefit of a doubt, then all you have left are the benefits of being dubious.
That sounds like a saying,
Riley told her.
A lesson I had to learn on my own, Aunt Sarah said.
Benefits of a doubt, dubiousness. I wondered if she blamed herself for what Amy had become.
You're on,
another man said. I resisted the urge to clear my throat and got straight to business.
Hello? Riley Davis?
I'm here.
I saw Chris's newly grown fur-tufted ear twitch. He was listening in. Maybe he'd have insights.
Good. Thank you for taking the call. Things are pretty dire here.
So I figured,
I heard her say.
I got a basic rundown. I was just gardening here, and the world's ending all the way over there.
I started. I thought of what I'd seen of Jessica and Riley, the strangling.
I'm sorry it came to that. Self-exile.
Nah,
she answered.
I kind of don't mind being on my own. Spent my life with Jack and the rest. It's good for me.
I wasn't sure it was. But an argument threatened to use precious time.
You should tell me what you want from me, she said. Your sister is incapacitated. You need a good biology manipulator. If we're talking about serious work, it might take some serious tinkering.
It might, I told her.
Meaning I should get started now if it's going to matter in how long?
20 minutes until the Simorg made her play for Fortuna. But Riley wasn't required for that. There was nothing she could theoretically do. But after... No more than an hour, but it might be less than that, I told her. Could be half that.
It would need to be deployed. I'd have to get it from here to there, she said. What is it?
It's genocide, I answered her. Chris was staring into my eyes.
Oh, of?
Us. No use dressing it up. It wasn't even easy to say.
That's a big ask.
I know, but we have resources.
For me, I mean, as a person. I don't do that kind of thing. I find outlets like squeaky toads and earpods, clones that aren't clones. I experiment with life forms that could seed other planets with life and think about biorockets that might be able to get them there. I make real-life versions of cartoon characters and movie characters I used to like. I don't want to hurt people.
Even if it means saving everyone else? I asked.
I think I get why your sister wasn't up to the task now,
Riley said.
Give me the details.
I did, outlining the parameters, the distinctions, the scale we were talking.
How long does it take for me to get from where I am to where you are?
Riley asked. I heard Aunt Sarah's response, even if I couldn't make out every word.
That's too long, then.
All right, what's his form sound like? Black-furred, rodent-like, lanky, with arched back, mouthful of crooked teeth. Okay. Even if I couldn't make out every word.
That's too long, then.
Wait, where was it? Oh, right. Even if I couldn't make out every word.
That's too long, then.
I can do it.
I looked over at Chris, who was 20 feet away, taking on a bestial form. He was going for his old namesake, it seemed. Black-furred, rodent-like, lanky, with an arched back. He'd just spoken despite a mouthful of crooked teeth. Can you give instructions to my old teammate? I asked. He'll access a lab to work, I'm assuming. Put it together.
It would have to be a tinker,
Riley told me.
Specialty in anything relating to biology, blood, cloning, genetics, parasites, or anything like that.
He is.
Then that works. Good. Perfect. Cool.
We'll be in touch, I told her. There was no time for niceties or farewells. Chris and I ran through the doors, hurrying to catch up with the team. Okay, this was 20.2. Let's get that saved. 20.2 last. 20.2 last. There we go. Alright, I have gotten like I don't know, somebody's blowing up my phone. What the hell's going on here? Oof. Ugh, these freaking people. Okay. Cool. Neat. What time is it? 7:40. Yeah, I can do another one. YOLO, as it were. Next chapter. So close to being done. Oh, I can almost taste it. New. Yep. Close that. Oh, cool, it picked it up automatically. Nice. Make that as wide as it's supposed to be. Cool. Get this to, because it's like this. Need to fix that. Don't know if that's... Okay, yeah, I was making noises. Cool. Let's do it. Actually, I need to water first. 1 second. He'll hydrate. All right. Now, for realsies. After I make that a little smaller or something. All right, I need you to be flat like that because I require it so. There we go. All right, let's go. No, delete. God damn it. Stop. Losing my mind. Let's go. Arc 20, Last, Chapter 3. This facility has been raided twice, I thought. Now we need to defend it. A woman lunged out of a hallway, catching Hookline off guard. She got in 2 quick cuts with her knife. Fucking... Hookline drew his chain around himself, forming overlapping X's of shifting chain that blocked 2 more swings. He grabbed the hook that was attached to the end of the chain, ready to swing. Byron kicked her with a metal boot instead, which got her away. Clockblocker bent down and touched her.
Fucking hell,
Hookline muttered. Blood ran down from his lacerated arm to his elbow. Wynne hurried to catch up.
There were a group in a side hallway. I would have warned you.
It's okay, Clockblocker said.
Real fucking okay,
Hookline swore, pulling a bloody hand away from the knife wound.
Fucking...
Was Gibbet a guy? I don't remember. Gibbet. Who the hell was Gibbet? All right, I think Gibbet was a guy.
I've got bandages,
Gibbet said. I took a second to make sure we weren't inadvertently letting ourselves get split up. Well, goddammit, she. It was right there, I missed it. Wait, whatever, why am I doing that? Hookline swore, pulling a bloody hand away from the knife wound.
Fucking...
I've got bandages,
Gibbet said. It took a second to make sure. I took a second. Ugh. I didn't like her voice either. Hookline swore,
I don't remember how I did
pulling a bloody hand away from the knife wound.
Fucking...
I've got bandages,
Gibbet said. I took a second to make sure we weren't inadvertently letting ourselves get split up while she got the bandages out. She began walking with him while wrapping his hand.
Shit,
Clockblocker muttered.
she's holding on too tight.
He was trying to pull the knife out of the woman's hand.
Heads up, coming down,
I told him, before floating down, being careful with the gun I was hauling. Holding? What the hell is holding? Hauling the knife out of the woman's hand. Heads up, coming down, I told him, before floating down, being careful with the gun I was hauling. In real life, there was no slapstick when a 12-ton weapon was swung around haphazardly, only tragic brain damage. I took hold of the woman's knife and snapped it off at the handle.
That works, except, I don't even want to know how your force field works now,
Clockblocker said.
She works very well right now. I'm hoping she stays that way,
I said. I pushed the blade into the wall to the point there was nothing sticking out that could be pulled free and used against us. I was fully aware that there had been a few slips in my force field's performance, and it seemed to be tied to my mental state, and right now, my mental state was me enduring a lot of nerve-jangling screaming. Speakers at the end of each hallway weren't helping, as they joined the screaming in my head to form a kind of chorus of emitted screeches and screams. Here and there, one person or another got access to a microphone and tried to transmit to a location.
Someone's at the door.
A bang could be heard over the speakers, several people gasping or shouting out in response.
At a hospital area.
At hospital. A bang could be heard over the speakers, several people gasping or shouting out in response.
At hospital area.
The sound cut out, replaced by an electronic screech. Another voice came in, from a more distorted microphone, whispering,
It gets easier if you listen between the words.
I looked around, then saw a metal trim on a door frame. I pulled it out, used a force field hand to strip away the extra bits of door, and then used it to tie up the time-frozen woman, wrists and ankles. Sveta reached out, slid tendrils between the edges of the speaker and the wall, and then tore it out, throwing it to the ground. The resulting feedback squeal exactly mimicked the faint rise and fall of the screaming in my head that I hadn't even realized was still there. The speaker sputtered, and the voice resumed.
Easier if you listen between the words. It gets easier.
Rain backhanded the speaker with a silver blade and then kicked it.
Thank you, Byron said. Fuck me, this is unbearable, even without the accompanying soundtrack.
Just endure, I told.
Why? Weird.
Fuck me, this is unbearable, even without the accompanying soundtrack.
Just endure, I told him. We gotta do as much damage as we can. Stop her or weaken her.
I know, just...
Keep moving, I told him. Let us know if you need to bail.
I don't. I'm not.
I nodded. Byron kept going.
Wait,
Cryptid called out. Byron stopped. We all remained where we were.
Not the time, I started. Shh.
He held one long, knobby finger to his rat-like muzzle, head bowed. He remained where he was, finger still to his muzzle, as he motioned for Byron to continue on. Byron took 2 steps, and Cryptid lunged, diving into one of the dark rooms. It sounded like he had thrown himself into a shelf of metal parts and tools. Rain jumped in, and I flew to get better lined up. It sounded like he had thrown himself into a shelf of metal parts and tools. Rain jumped in, and I flew to get better lined up, but the nature of the hallway and the surrounding people made it hard to get my gun aimed right. Cryptid was wrestling with something that looked like a mechanical dog. I dropped the gun, ready to dive in, but Rain was already stabbing the thing with a silver blade. It provided the weak point that Cryptid could use to tear the thing in half. Metal with a core of flesh.
Tell me that's not Machine Army,
Rain said.
No,
Cryptid growled, climbing to his feet, dropping the 2 halves. He sounded derisive. He pulled off a piece of its head. Cryptid growled, climbing to his feet, dropping the two halves. He sounded derisive. He pulled a piece off its head and pulled a computer chip out of a bloody socket. He stuck the chip into a slot on his belt, then pulled it out.
A tinker named Gusto made it. It's set to receive radio waves. She distorted an incoming signal to give it an attack command.
Is Gusto friendly? I asked.
Was.
Cryptid growled before pushing past me.
Fuck,
Rain muttered.
Jesus, fuck.
Stay calm, stay level, I said. The other teams had gone down the hallways. The malfunctions had split up, with Caryatid hanging back with the slower group, Finale in our group toward the middle, and Withdrawal up at the head of the pack with the faster people, like Damsel and Trophy Wife. Sidepiece had some surprising stamina, all considered, and was keeping up with Trophy Wife. The end result was that we didn't really split up that much. The forward group went down one hall, changed their mind, and then took another, or they split up to check the branching paths and made wordless agreements because two routes were dead ends. We reached another set of hallways, and they reconvened to exchange words before making decisions. I stuck with the main group, holding my impractically large gun overhead. The various groups had split up, and it was convenient to stay with the people we'd flown in with. There was too much danger of people coming at us from the rear or flanks, or something happening that complicated the fights ahead of us. Splitting up meant we could cover the major concerns, threats, and groups that might be lurking in the lower floors, without losing too much time.
It gets easier.
The whispered broadcast cut out, someone else jumping in to try and broadcast something, but it was a third of a word, incoherent and shouted.
Between the words.
The original broadcast reasserted itself. Lights began to go out throughout the facility. Our hallway went dark. Wynne cranked something at his chest. Tinkertech armor lit up, illuminating the area around him. Byron began to fill the hallway with motes, each casting maybe a tenth of the light a lamp might shed. I felt my eyes adjust to the gloom, which was normal-ish. Then they adjusted more.
There,
Trophy Wife said.
Do I want to know where those eyes came from?
Withdrawal asked.
Nope, no, don't tell me.
Finale added.
Woman couldn't pay her debt on time. I gave her the choice.
No.
Finale raised her voice, drowning out Trophy Wife.
Stop!
Gave me her cat.
No!
My skin crawled. I stopped paying attention to the gun, and it scraped glass that was protecting what might have been a breaker panel. The sounds produced, along with the sputter of a buzz from the broken speaker behind us, formed a word.
Cats.
The thought was involuntary. I'm made of strays and escaped pets and rodents and bugs. My skin crawled more. Chris was looking at me, his eyes glowing in the dark. Hate to complain, but I could really do without the non-consensual mutations, I said.
Then stay more than 50 feet away from me,
Trophy Wife said. I felt an urge to say something back, then decided against it. I decided to keep the night vision while I was at it.
Get between the words,
the voice whispered from speakers. Damsel annihilated the speaker at the end of the hallway.
Don't make that much noise,
Clockblocker said.
You'll get some unwanted...
She did, Wynne said. He looked back at us with metal eyes that had holes in the surface, each hole rimmed with glowing circuit patterns. Wynne said. He looked back at us with metal eyes that had holes in the surface, each hole rimmed with glowing circuit patterns in gold.
TAC radar says we've got people coming from both directions. Group of 5 ahead, they're finding hiding spots and weirdly heavy footsteps coming from behind.
He pulled a gun out. It changed configuration, locking into position over his hand. I was closer to the rear than the front. It took a bit of flying acrobatics to get the gun turned around, but I pointed it the way we'd come. Wynne crouched below me, pointing the same way.
Weirdly heavy means brute? I asked. No idea.
I changed the setting on my gun, narrowing the beam from the laser setting I'd had it on. Below me, Caryatid had caught up and crouched a bit, taking on her breaker form. She was a good person to have in the way of any stampeding heavy hitter.
It gets between the worlds,
the voice on the speaker said. There was a feedback squeal. Behind me, Damsel used her power, tearing into a wall, before hurling herself through the hole. I heard the follow-up shots.
Pew, pew, pew,
Finale said, her voice quiet.
Pew.
The fight in the other hallway unfolded in the same moment the figure in our hallway made his appearance. I almost pulled the trigger on seeing the monstrous face, then pulled back.
No!
Wynne had already pulled the trigger. A sphere of glowing blue energy soared down the hallway, catching the figure in the lower body. The gun reconfigured, loading for another shot, taking on a red glow in the gloom.
Shit,
I said.
We know it?
We know him, I said. I flew back a short bit to look down the other hallway and saw the fighting was ongoing. Nothing I could address with my gun.
All 5 are down,
Wynne said. All right. Nothing I could address with my gun.
All 5 are down,
Wynne said.
4 unconscious, 1 off radar, maybe dead, and then this guy.
Caryatid dropped her form immediately, going to Finale's side. I set my gun down, and down the hall... I guess it would be flew. Caryatid dropped her form immediately, going to Finale's side. I set my gun down and flew down the hall to our fallen straggler. Torso lay on the floor of the hallway, hands cupping his groin.
It's Torso, one of Deathchester's people. What did you shoot him with? I asked. Concussive force ball? I figured it'd either put him on the floor or slow him down long enough for something more serious. I'm sorry, man.
Torso lifted his head off the floor, then thunked it back down.
He'll be all right,
Gibbet crowed, her voice muffled by the hangman's hood she wore. She was catching up behind Wynne.
Come on, Torso. Took you long enough to show up, you loser.
Torso thunked his head against the floor again. Sidepiece spoke. Torso thunked his head against the floor again. Sidepiece spoke from the end of the hallway.
You're so inconvenient. You'd better headbutt that fucking Endbringer that's screaming at us right now and make it worth it to bring you along.
Why couldn't he come with us? I asked.
Because if he fell on the damn dragon plane, which he would, we'd all be goners,
Gibbet said. An L-shaped bit of metal appeared below his neck, tied to... Gibbet said. An L-shaped bit of metal appeared below his neck, tried to lift him, and bent. More appeared, straining to force him to a standing position. Hookline provided his hook, which, bent in mid-air, caught Torso around the neck and lifted. Torso finally let go of his groin with one hand, grabbed the metal L, and found something approximating balance. In the gloom, his mannequin head with the mismatched cartoon eyes looked especially horrifying, especially where the paint had smeared or scuffed, making it look like he was crying. I watched as they goaded him forward, Gibbet giving him a shove on one shoulder that would have been helpful if he weren't so prone to falling over. He passed me, and I could see that someone had written "moron" on the back of his head in what looked to be permanent marker. I saw him stumble.
Don't fall on my gun,
I called out to them. Torso had to turn roughly 270 degrees to look back in my direction, which increased the chance he'd fall on my gun, as he swayed badly. At the very least, he didn't fall on my gun. I bent down to retrieve it, looked back, and saw Wynne staring at it. I sighed, picked it up, and followed the others. Deathchester was all together, minus Mockument, who hadn't showed.
"Sorry again,"
Wynne told Torso, as he caught up with Clockblocker. The people who'd attacked were wearing refugee clothing. One wore a mask and was partially burned as he lay on the floor.
"Listen to worlds,"
a voice on a distant speaker whispered to us.
"We need to move fast," I said. "Formation before was working. Try to keep us informed, Wynne." "I know this area," Sveta said. "The main concourse is this way."
The speakers continued to play. Even sounds that weren't from the speakers were becoming more and more like whispers and vocal sounds from all sides, as though every unoccupied office we passed through was filled with a half-formed memory.
"Sorry. Wash.
Like my dad's voice, trying to get into the habit of talking to me again after going without. Alright, hold on. Those are though every unoccupied office we passed through was filled with a half-formed memory.
"Sorry."
"Wash.
Like my dad's voice, trying to get into the habit of talking to me again after going a while without visits. Sorry, he'd said. The nurses at the hospital, before a chore I had dearly wished was unnecessary and, self-contradicting myself, constant at the same time. Something Sveta had said during one of her visits, after a lingering moment of eye contact, when even she had taken in the full reality of what I'd been and found herself momentarily lost for words.
Fuck you, Simorg.
The statement was marked by others looking at me. Oh, I'd said that out loud.
"Do we need to worry?"
Clockblocker asked.
Addendum to that thought, I said. Fuck her, and no, it's not working like she wants it to. She's poking at obvious weak spots I've been dealing with for years. I can take it. "'Kay, look out," Rain said. "I remember she talked once about a thing she had on her fridge once. You got home from work or school and you put a smiley face up on the fridge, or a frowny face, or a stormy face."
"That is the lamest fucking thing,"
Sidepiece said.
"You know what I got when I got home from school?"
"I think this is a trick question, and you're going to pull something out of your middle," Finale said.
"I got a boot to the ass."
"Oh, I'm sorry."
"Fuck off with your apologies."
"Your point, Precipice?"
I asked, my voice tenser and my tone terser than I'd meant it to be. Say that again.
"Oh, I'm sorry."
"Fuck off with your apologies."
"Your point, Precipice?"
I asked, my voice tenser and my tone terser than I'd meant it to be.
"Sorry, just before they derail us."
We were passing beneath a set of massive industrial tubes that churned with fluids passing through them. Water for the facility, I imagined.
"Reality check," Rain said. "Scale of 1 to 10.
All right, hail hydrate. Okay. Water for the facility, I imagined.
"Reality check," Rain said. "Scale of 1 to 10. Who's above a 7 or below a 3?
"Below a 5, Byron said. "Below a 5 is a slippery slope."
"Sure," Rain said. "No judgment."
"I'm fine,"
Damsel said, annoyed.
Is it even possible to be above a 7?
I started. I'm fucking annoyed with this. I'm spooked about what comes next, and if we can even beat her. But I don't feel like she's getting to me. It's distracting, and there's probably a point to it. Put me down as a 7. I'm freaking, Caryatid said, from the very rear of the group. I keep hearing the screech. I'm freaking, Caryatid said, from the very rear of the group. I keep hearing the screeches and squeals, and I think of the needle woman who almost got me the last time I was here. I don't know. 4?
6?
Finale sounded unsure.
I really don't know.
Below a 5 or above a 7, Trophy Wife said, sounding annoyed that Finale was contributing unnecessary information.
I'll admit I'm thinking of my brother a lot, Byron said. 4.
I'm an 8 or a 9,
Cryptid said. He gave his sash a pat. Oh, also he's got crazy voice right now, so not that.
I'll admit I'm thinking of my brother a lot, Byron said. 4.
I'm an 8 or a 9,
Cryptid said. He gave his sash a pat.
I have vials, including one for dealing with mind control. Doesn't scare me.
The bird one. You could have used it already, I noted.
Maybe someone else will need it,
Cryptid said, narrowing his eyes at me. He looked away.
Works better if I have a mission in mind.
Nice to have in the back pocket, I told him.
It is,
he replied, before his ear twitched and he looked away. Anyone else? Rain asked, hopeful. Torso put out both hands, all fingers extended.
10,
Hookline said, unnecessarily.
Good for you,
Finale said.
Even with the crotch shot?
Wynn asked. Torso pulled his hands back. He swayed for a second, then put them out again, pinky finger and thumb on one black-gloved hand tucked in. 8.
His skull is too thick for her to get to him,
Gibbet said, giving Torso a knock on the head. Torso, in turn, gave her a thumbs up.
Others are ahead,
Cryptid said, before joining the advance group, closer to Damsel and Trophy Wife. Ahead was an open area containing rows of pumps. It was only partially lit, with the lights flickering, but there was a set of stairs leading up over one of the pumps to a higher level. Some of the other groups that had come in on the same planes of us were up... same planes as us? Flickering, but there was a set of stairs leading up over one of the pumps to a higher level. Some of the other groups that had come in on the same planes as us were up there. I saw Parian and Rachel with one of the dogs, some of Semiramis's group, and 2 wardens. Vista was among the wardens, looking down our way, keeping tabs on Byron. Sveta reached up to grab the railing and haul herself up. This way! Anyone injured, needing a lift? I asked.
Weak.
It took me half a second to realize the voice hadn't come from the group. Another half second to realize that Caryatid was approaching me. I'm not injured, but... Sure, I said. The gun was heavy and very close to my tolerance levels, but an added 120 or whatever pounds wasn't enough to make flying impossible. The stairs that led over the massive pump were the equivalent of 3 stories. I grabbed her with force field hands, then lifted. Me too, when you're done? Byron asked. I got you, Sveta called down. She'd just been talking to Vista, maybe telling Vista that Byron was at a 4 here. She hopped down onto the pump, grabbed something, and then unfurled to reach down to Byron on the ground. Metal squeaked, and the squeak paralleled the shifting pitch of the screaming in my head. Others took the stairs. It's not just that she drives you around the bend, I thought. It's that she's constantly gathering information, constantly refining that ability to drive you crazy, and refining her precognition so you're less and less effective against her in a fight. Dungeons are below us, Sveta was saying, to a group of capes who looked like they were one of Foresight's peripheral groups. On the next floor will be the first main floor. Sveta was saying, to a group of capes who looked like they were one of Foresight's peripheral groups. On the next floor will be the first main floor, including the lobby, which you've probably seen. If you go beneath the stairs, you'll find the Arboretum. Arboretum? I asked. Lounge area, Sveta said. They were using it as a backup cafe. Vista says we're set up on the ground floor, but floors 2 and 3 have a few dangerous parahumans, so we've been delayed. Some people snapped and they're dangerous, Vista told me. We are sorting through people by stress level, using the front doors by the lobby to evacuate people who can't stick it out, but we can't evacuate anyone upstairs until we clear the middle floors, and we can't easily lure the compromised to one of the containment zones until we can get past them. Containment zones? Vista nodded. Right now, we're apparently using the dungeon, but most of that was built to work with the custodian in charge, and she's a Titan now. She wouldn't cooperate even if she wasn't a Titan, Sveta said. She winced. I could really do... Oh. I'm getting hungry. She wouldn't cooperate even if she wasn't a Titan, Sveta said. She winced. I could really do with this screaming stopping.
If you can hear the scream, at least she's still working on you.
People were up the stairs. Everyone accounted for. I used the gun to ram my way through the double doors. I could hear distant screaming and sped up my approach, flying while bringing the gun around to point. The heroes were gathered on the ground level. Heroes were storming the stairs, which went straight to the upper floors, hallways stabbing out to the right and left.
All teams, go!
Defiant called out, a wire between his teeth. Oh. All right. Which went straight to the upper floors, hallways stabbing out to the right and left.
All teams, go!
Defiant called out, a wire between his teeth. He had his spear in hand and was directing the groups.
I want a strong defensive team at our back line here, around me.
I moved out of the way, flying up and back so the rest of our group could file in. I saw Gilpatrick, wearing a full patrol uniform. When he looked at me, his forehead lined with worry, posture tense. I flew to him, pointing my gun in the general direction of upstairs.
Good to see you,
he said with genuine feeling. Is it? I asked, without thinking. I mean, I'm glad, if that's true.
Gave up leading the team. Put Jester in charge, which is helping make this feel really fucking surreal,
Gilpatrick said with some added wariness. I didn't mean to put you in that position, having to go with Rain.
You didn't ask. I chose.
I looked at him, remembered how he'd backed me up, as best as he was able, giving me a place to stay after the barbecue. My team was just trying to ballpark how we're doing, I told him, rating from 1 to 10, 10 being fantastic, 1 being that we're a danger to others. Where are you at, Gilpatrick?
I'm not a danger, he said. I've got some training from my PRT days. I'll last longer than most, don't worry.
And your power?
Thinker. Best I can figure out. I see the lies people tell themselves.
The lies?
As physical things. Twisting features. It takes concentration to turn off. Took me a second. I thought it was a broken power until I talked to my kids.
The patrol block? Block.
Took me a second. I thought it was a broken power until I talked to my kids.
The patrol block?
Didn't go into that conversation thinking I was going to quit and leave them, but I know some of them well enough to match it to what I was seeing.
I'm sorry.
I'm not,
he said. He smiled, but it was tight.
I was seeing.
I'm sorry.
I'm not,
he said. He smiled, but it was tight, a bit forced.
Maybe I won't be teaching hundreds of kids and helping them all a little, but I can be here, screen for unwitting traitors. Let's get through this. I'll help a few dozen, I think, which might not have ever gotten help if it weren't for me.
We'll get through it, I told him, or die trying. He smiled, and it wasn't as forced. Defiant was shouting orders.
Need a team to go to the 6th floor.
Defiant called out, stopping as Torso tripped and landed on his face.
We need any capes who aren't feeling confident to escort civilian groups out. Be aware she's above us. She may break free of the facility to attack and demoralize.
My team was sorted. I should go, I said.
Victoria,
he said. I met his eyes. I almost winced at the weariness there that I'd never seen even when he'd been dealing with the troublesome kids like Cammy or Tom B.
It really is good to see you. I don't mean that in an inappropriate way. It's... every way I can think of phrasing it makes me sound like an old man.
You're not that old, Gilpatrick.
Too old and weary for you, Victoria. All I mean is, and I don't want to put too much weight on this, but you're a sight for sore eyes, and my eyes feel very sore tonight.
Thank you, I told him.
Be safe.
He didn't say anything after that.
Tonight.
Thank you, I told him.
Be safe.
You too, I told him. I felt a measure of guilt. I remembered how Gilpatrick had emphasized holding back. He'd argued for avoiding violence and lethal measures wherever possible. 5 pounds of gun. 5 pounds of gun. 20 pounds of armor and costume. However many pounds of additional gear, medical stuff, supplies. Metaphors for the amounts of attention we should pay towards violence, protecting others, supplies. I hefted my 12 tons of gun, doing my best to avoid bludgeoning anyone as I returned to my team. The gun wasn't even the fucking irony here. 12 tons of gun was nothing compared to the weight of the countless lives I was preparing to take. I looked over at Chris. Defiant, I called over. Are the labs clear?
Only if you help clear them. 6th floor, feel free,
he barked. He looked like he was going to say something else, then stopped. He turned, raising his head to look up. The ceiling caved in. A plume of dust, concrete. Simorg. I thought at first that it was just a psychological tactic. Telekinetically controlled dust to scare us, remind us we weren't safe anywhere here. Then it screamed. The sound in my head redoubled, rattled, became words. The words were accompanied by mental images.
I never had a trigger event,
Dean's voice.
I had to abandon you for my own health,
Jessica's.
I'm sorry, I was selfish. It wasn't your fault.
Each was a fragment, a thing that had never been said as much as they should have. A slice of a world that would have made more sense, gone better places, seductive. Floating in the air, I curled up, knees to chest. Fuck that. I straightened, tall, eyes wide. I used my aura, the briefest of pulses, a push, taking that fuck you and broadcasting it for the extra emphasis. She was there, crouching, her wings around her. The aura didn't touch her. I couldn't even be sure she registered it happened. But for everyone else, it was a nudge, a slap in the face, a bit of fuck you to shake them from anything they might have been thinking or feeling that was similar to what I was experiencing. I aimed and fired in the next moment. Fragments of roof cascaded down in a stream, absorbing a good 70% of what I was firing. I shifted position, flying to one side, and a cape took off, flying in my way. Only reflex kept me from shooting him in the back. Sveta lunged in, reaching for someone in range of falling rubble. That same person slapped falling rubble aside. It struck Sveta's reaching arm. For what had to be 15 seconds, not 10. That same person slapped falling rubble aside. It struck Sveta's reaching arm. For what had to be 15 seconds, the Simorg crouched in the midst of the lobby, where our side had been regrouping. She didn't move a wing-tip. Nobody fought on her defense or intentionally threw a force field up to protect her. For those 15 seconds, we didn't touch her. Capes advanced, then second-guessed themselves as more debris came down. They were blinded by the dust, and then someone bumped into them, disturbing their aim, and they didn't feel confident to make the shot. My own aim suffered, because my vision warped, distorting. Trophy Wife had moved to a place where I wasn't in her range anymore. She granted herself mutations based off of the trophies she'd taken, and she granted lesser effects to people around her. Problem was, that involved a faint transition period, which was fucking with me at... Oh shit. Why was I clicked down there? Stop! That involved a faint transition period. People around her. Problem was, that involved a faint transition period, which was fucking with me at a critical moment. The see-in-the-dark mutation was dropping away from my eyes now that I wasn't in her range. She shifted from the crouch, rising 20 feet into the air. With her telekinesis, she pulled chunks away from the ceiling. Each chunk flew down with terminal velocity. No lead-in, no warning, each moving in a clear straight line with no prevarication or misleading. Each chunk took a life. The cascade of chunks of ceiling began to pick up, became more aimless. I couldn't shake that each stumble to avoid the stuff was someone moving as she'd wanted. I took aim and I fired. Chunks that were falling stopped, disintegrating beneath the beam, giving me a tantalizing second or two of contact before the next chunk blocked the continued beam. I heard people shriek. Withdrawal had a crumpled leg, struck by a stone. Finale was shouting for him. There were a good dozen people like him, people who were close enough to get hurt. Now I need to re-emphasize. Withdrawal had a crumpled leg, struck by a stone. Finale was shouting for him. There were a good dozen people like him, people who were close enough to get hurt. Every instinct I had told me to get in there, to dive in and save him. Logic told me that this was one of our last shots. We had to hurt her. Take her down a peg so she couldn't win that tug of war against Titan Fortuna and take over the entire system. The screaming was a roar in my ears, like the adrenaline in my ears when I'd been trapped. The endless loop of trying to logic my way through emotional issues and emotion my way through logic when neither would serve. Being caught by Ophion. She's fucking with us. Putting us in a lose-lose, demoralizing, psychologically... Okay? Putting us in a lose-lose, demoralizing. Serve. Being caught by Ophion. She's fucking with us. Putting us in a lose-lose, demoralizing, psychologically assaulting us. Because it served her goal. Because she needed to, I told myself. If we could push through this, it'd inconvenience her. Fuck you, I willed. I pushed again, tried to feed courage and outrage out to the crowd on a level that would serve the people who needed it. I'm not who I was when Ophion got me. I'm changed. The words rambled through my brain, pushing through a fog of noise and screaming. Change. Metamorphosis. Cocoon. Cocoon. The scream latched onto the memory. Me wrapped in a cocoon of stray dogs, cats, bugs. The cocoon had become a coffin encapsulating me after Crawler had... Stop putting us in a lose... Stop. Me wrapped in a cocoon of stray dogs, cats, bugs. The cocoon had become a coffin encapsulating me after Crawler had eaten into me with acid. But that coffin had opened. Ribs with flesh strung between them had parted, revealing me within. I held on to that image, pushing out, trying to capture it. Holding it firm in my mind, I dove for withdrawal. I snatched him up. I had a fleeting glance of finale. Rather than carry him to safety, I used momentum and flung him across the floor, relying on the metal rig and its propensity to skid. He stopped himself against the wall, using the springs, then twisted around, aiming his pill popper. I saved others, grabbing them. The fragile one fired the gun, placing the shots only when I was willing it, only when I was keeping an eye on things, to make sure nobody flew in the way. Pressing the attack. Staying low to the ground, watching the environment, I saved 3 people. Others jumped in, helping. When I saw people losing courage, I gave pulses of courage. When I saw them succumbing to the fear, not ear, in helping. When I saw people losing courage, I gave pulses of courage. When I saw them succumbing to the fear and head fuckery, I gave them a taste of righteous fuck you.
I need you to get me in there,
Sveta called out to me.
Okay, but I don't have my force field.
She gave me a confused look. Then a golden beam stabbed out, striking the shield the Simorgh was using to protect herself, until Byron pierced it with the spike of stone. She connected the dots, looking back over her shoulder. The fragile one was there, visible in the shadows of dust. Chest open, ribs splayed, a hole big enough for me to move through. Her arms were extended, gripping the gun Dragon had given me, aiming it. "Come!" I called out with a pulse of my aura. I reached out a hand. But she reached out. I called out with a pulse of my aura. I reached out a hand. But she reached out, because I was in harm's way, and any seconds spent protesting were seconds I was in danger's way. She grabbed my hand, and I braced myself, flying hard the other way. Sveta grabbed the rubble the Simorgh was using to shield herself, then she hurled herself at the Simorgh. Falling rubble stabbed directly down at Sveta. She unfolded, creating a hole in her midsection for it to stab through, unfolded her arm, and grabbed the Simorgh with a dozen tendrils. Reaching back, she extended a limb toward the crowd, grabbing Clockblocker's hand. She was frozen, locked in place, with 10 tendrils around the Simorgh's head and 2 around one smaller wing. The Simorgh was positioned low to the ground. I took evasive action, flying back and away, while the gun took the opportunity to shoot. The Simorgh was still alive while grabbed, and was still using her telekinesis. Every chunk of rubble saw purpose. A larger chunk stalled defiant. Another formed a wall as the fragile one opened fire. Byron drew moats around her, trying to seal her inside a stone growth, then encasing it in ice for good measure. Torso began running, sprinting across the floor, wobbling, hoppling. Trying to seal her inside a stone growth, then encasing it in ice for good measure. Torso began running, sprinting across the floor, wobbling, hopping precariously over rubble. A single stone slid in front of him, and he tripped. Dust and rubble moved in a loose, slow cyclone around her. Precariously over rubble. A single stone slid in front of him, and he tripped. Dust and rubble moved in a loose, slow cyclone around her, picking up in intensity as a frozen Sveta held her. Hookline's weapon navigated its route through the Simorgh's storm, rubble bouncing off of the chain instead of bending it. Clockblocker hurried to Hookline's side, a non-living weapon that would serve the same purpose. The effect as they made contact wasn't the same purpose. Clockblocker winced, hand pulling away, and the chain went completely limp. Power conflict. I looked past the clouds. Stop. Pulling away, and the chain went completely limp. Power conflict. I looked past the cloud to the vague away,
image.
And the chain went completely limp. Power conflict. I looked past the cloud to the vague image of the Seamorg's face, still wrapped by tendrils. The beam cut through some of it, tracing a burning, glowing line through her, while I crouched on the ground. In the same moment Clockblocker's power broke, the cyclone stopped, every fragment finding a target. One fragment grazed me across the forehead, wrenching my head to one side with a force that made my neck twang. I canceled my force field and renewed it, shielding as many people as I could. My gun fell to the ground behind me. Seamorg flew skyward, into the hole she'd come through. She was barely through it when one of the dragon craft, upstairs, rammed into her, throwing her into the side of the hole. I caught and blocked as much rubble as I could, as we all shifted focus to backing away from the fallout of the battle above.
"Keep moving if you can," Defiant called out. "She's on the back foot. Non-combat capes, get the injured clear."
Gilpatrick was one of the capes to do that.
"Dragon's back online," Defiant called out. "Crystal clear? I need you to get this device to Narwhal. Antares?"
"Yes,"
I called out, one hand at my forehead.
"Dinah Alcott is on the 7th floor. Dragon thinks she's a target. You can take lab rats to the labs on the 6th floor as you go. Go!"
I looked around to confirm my team was more or less in fighting shape, nodded, and then led the way. As it began, younger me, so it continues. A cut on the head, a weird feeling of pride, and a bit of twisted hope. All right. 20.3. 20.3 last. 20.3. 20.3 last. Laced. Okay. Alrighty, I need to go eat food very badly. I'm starving, so I am going to cut things off here and do my finishing stuff as I usually do off stream. Thank you for coming to watch. If you did, if you didn't, well, I don't know who I'm talking to then. So, yeah. Thank you and see you next time.